Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Logos Project.
Welcome to the Logos Problem.
Noah,
Abraham, Isaac,
Jacob. I want Jacob. Jacob is a boo. That makes sense.
That makes sense.
Welcome to the Logos Project. This is your host, Dom, with my good friend Sam and roommate. We probably shouldn't have told him that you were also my roommate.
Is that in order? Friend and roommate?
No, roommate, and then you know,
That's messed up.
I have to live with you.
Just accidental versus purpose-idental?
No.
I'm just kidding. Incidental?
I thought you were going to say accidental versus essential or
That's
something.
what I meant to say.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Or substantial.
I'm not that smart. Substantial?
Yeah. Oh, both work.
oh,
yeah. Well, yeah.
Off to a great start. I too can theology. Today's intro was brought to you in part by my nieces and nephews who are visiting us for the week.
That's who that was. I was wondering.
Yeah, as you're feeding them stuff to say. It was like, these kids have been here for days. I just never thought to ask where they came from.
That's funny.
Not even Catholic. Big family.
Nice. That's always awesome. Dynasties. We need to build Christian dynasties.
Dynasties.
All right, Sam. Is there something you want to talk about?
So I have this idea.
Okay.
Right, so we agree that Western civilization is built on a bedrock of Christianity,
Yes.
right? So the idea is, at their core, like all American ideas are more or less Christian, I feel like.
Let me just nuance that a little bit. They all come from Christianity.
Yeah, so ultimately what we're seeing is like where we're erring is like deliberate perversions of Christian ideas,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so to tie that in, right, you have like kind of this idea of Post-Modernism, which I would define. How would you define it? We talked about this earlier. You had a really eloquent definition. Ultimately, I would say it's a rejection of like objective truth,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's also this idea of like intersectional identity.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how those two things tie in together more or less, right? Because like I could tie those things together, but I don't know if that's like accidental or essential.
Yeah. No, that's
Wait, so first, what's your definition of postmodernism?
Well, I mean, I would, as I told you earlier, I'd start with modernism. What is modernism, right? Because you can't know what post something is if you don't know what something is, right? And so, modernism is basically something that grew out of the Enlightenment. So, prior to the Enlightenment, you had a deeply, I hate the word religious, you had a worldview that was not merely naturalistic. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like, you know, the visible world is all there is kind of thing. You had this kind of this philosophical outlook that took into consideration the Greeks and what they offered to us, especially through Plato and Aristotle. So you had this this world that was predicated on philosophizing about being itself, about concepts, universals like dogness and treeness. Do they exist? Where do they exist? All these kind of things. And but it also, you know, it was part of a society that was deeply religious in the sense where the very structures of the society was predicated on liturgy, on the transcendent, on something beyond that is somehow out of our reach and yet becomes within our reach when we gather together and, you know, are oriented towards the ultimate good. You know, so this is what we get from Plato initially, but eventually Christianity. I'm going down a tangent, aren't I?
Yes.
Eventually Christianity, you know, claims that this goodness has entered history. And that's where you get Jesus Christ as a figure. All right, I'm going to stop with that tangent. So modernism is this idea that we are doing away with the superstitious beliefs of the past And now we are being more enlightened. We are evolving. So there's a dogma of progress involved with modernism. So modernism basically took very reductionistic forms where the empirical sciences are basically that which accumulates data and analyzes things through data, objectively. So there's no like supernatural beings like angels and demons and gods and stuff like that. It's we've gone past those kind of dumb ideas, and now what we know is that data responds to our prodding it, and therefore it's intelligible, and we can come to gather the information that we get from experiments, and that's how we explain the world. So with this kind of empiricism comes a kind of rationalism, right? This ultra-rationalism where we can explain everything by studying the world by these tools that we have. So it becomes where the world is no longer a mystery that points beyond itself. It's something that we can master and use for our own needs. So it kind of moves from the idea of dominion of the world, where we are, taking care of what has been given to us by the transcendent, to this idea of manipulation and use of the world, where we can curve it and form it to our own uses because we know how it works and we've figured it out. Finally, we are enlightened, right? So that's modernism. The problem with that is that it rejects all these philosophical presuppositions that made modernism possible. And so the result of modernism is postmodernism, where all those things that made this kind of empirical way of studying the world possible are rejected as superstitious. Then the world loses its intelligibility, and then what is real becomes what I think is real. So postmodernism is where we determine through ourselves what the world is. Values, right and wrong, the good of Plato, ethics, all of this becomes a matter of subjective opinion. And so truth itself becomes merely perspective. And so you have a lot more of a shift from metaphysics to psychology and to phenomenology and stuff like that. Not to say that those things are bad, you can use them very well, but they were reductive. They were used reductively. So that long spiel, that long useless tangent.
I wouldn't say useless.
Yeah, that tangent was to show that you had this kind of worldview that was transcendent, and it was seen as superstitious and primitive. And so modernism claims that we can know the world rationally and use it to our own ends, but then underlying that kind of transcendence leads to the breakdown of objective truth, like you said, and everything becomes merely subjective, and we determine the reality of the world, and that's where that leads.
So there was two things that I thought of while you were saying that.
Yeah.
The first one was, you said you don't like to use the word religious.
Yeah.
And I read a quote recently that I feel like applies. And it was the difference between like religious people and we'll say secular people are that religious people know they're religious.
That's so good.
Which kind of makes sense, right? So
Yeah.
even on the podcast I was telling you about today, like he's talking to a physicist who was like clearly atheist. Like he made that point. Well, anyway, so the second thing I thought of was what was the second thing I thought of? Oh, I want to change my definition of postmodernism.
You want to change it? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So I think this will tie in better, right? So instead of I think I use the word like intersectional identity. Right?
Yeah.
I think the core understanding there is that all identity is a social construct.
Yeah.
Right? So would that tie into, because I know we were talking about a theology of the body. What do the Catholics call it?
Yeah.
TOB?
Yeah.
TB?
Yeah, that's
TOB?
right. Yeah.
TB is taken. That acronym's taken.
TOB.
TOB. Yeah. So I was curious if that like tied in at all to what you're studying in that class. I don't know. Right?
I can see a way how
identity,
it can. Yeah.
does identity tie into that at all?
yeah.
'Cause I don't even know what that means.
Yeah. You don't know what identity means? Like, it's a complicated word. Is that what you mean?
Good question. What do I mean? No. So what I mean is I don't know what identity means in the sense of like in a philosophical like frame.
Okay. Identity. I mean, I don't know. Philosophy doesn't. I mean, I don't know.
Identity seems pretty big. Like that's
I think of identity
right?
as what something. What makes it that thing in the sense of, the formal principle. So, a cat is a cat, and that's its identity, right? Now we
Katniss.
you can you can specify that like your identity is human, but you can, that's like one level. Another level is Sam Laurie, and that level here is more of a, it's not just your humanness that's your identity, it's your particular humanness. So identity is kind of a vague word. It can mean many things, I would say. And also in psychology, it's very specific. In philosophy, it's much more broad. You can use it more broadly.
Well, I feel like I know what it means in the sense of psychology, right?
Yeah.
And then part of that too is what you're saying is like, at what level are you trying to extract that understanding of identity, right? So is it like, hey, my identity as an American versus my identity as a North Carolinian? Is that the word there? Carolinian?
I don't know, is it?
That'll work.
Yeah.
Yeah, versus my identity as, a military member, something like that. So that's another beef I think I have with like postmodernism in general. So you have this idea of like intersectional politics, where it's like, okay,
Let me stop you right. Well, you're about to do it. Define that for us.
intersectional politics would be like, where you're finding like random, we'll say cross sections of like population,
Okay.
in order to put some kind of value on your victimhood, right? And so the idea is, at what point, right? So we're all oppressed,
Yeah.
right? I would say that. So you're
In some sense or other. Is
I
that
would
what
say,
you
yeah.
mean?
So you're from France. You're a Frenchman. So we make fun of you for that all the time.
Yeah.
So you could say you're oppressed for that, right? You're
Okay.
less than 6 foot tall. So I
Okay.
can say you're oppressed for that reason,
Okay.
right? And there's empirical data to support the fact that most
Yeah.
Fortune 500 companies are led by people who are taller than
Interesting.
6 foot.
Yeah.
So it's like, wow, I'm oppressed. You know what I'm saying? I'm not
Yeah.
oppressed because my skin color, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, but I'm oppressed because
Your looks.
I'm not as attractive as Brad Pitt. Yeah, exactly. Right. So,
yeah.
or you could be like, oh, I'm a female, which is not a minority, by the way. So like, jot that down. Okay.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, I'm a Latina female, and then I'm a Latina female who has 3 kids, and I'm a Latina female who has 3 kids, and one of them is special needs. You know what I'm saying? So like, ultimately, you get to the point of like, you're an individual. And I feel like people are trying to quantify more or less their victimhood. Okay. But I think, right, to tie this back to what I originally wanted to talk about.
This is fascinating. Keep going.
It is, right?
Yeah.
So Jung talks about the
glad I have
idea
ideas.
of like archetypes, right? So it's like, on some level, all of us having some kind of core understanding of Christianity because of how it's entwined into Western culture, whether or not we want to admit that, I would argue. We all want to identify with somebody who is nailed to a cross, but undeserving of that happening to them.
Yeah.
We all want to play this like idea of victim, right? And I would argue the difference is where more or less we place the blame. And that I think is a big difference between Christians and postmodernists, because I would argue that you can't be both.
Yeah. No.
What do you think?
So I agree. So there's 2 things that you said that came to mind. So I'm going to say them in case I forget. The first one was, ultimately, if you keep using this identity politics, what did you call it?
Intersectionality or intersectional politics.
If you keep using intersectional politics as a worldview, ultimately it does end up with the individual. The next thing that you said is the idea of victimhood. We all ultimately have this kind of social collective subconscious, you might say, that makes us want to be vindicated because of the injustice of existence.
The injustice. I like that a lot. The
Yeah.
injustice of
I
existence.
mean, life is shit.
Life
Like,
is suffering. That's what Jordan Peterson always says. Life is
Yeah.
suffering. It's like, what are you going to do about it? Like,
yeah. I mean, and
Right?
so the idea is that all Buddhism, Stoicism, Epicureanism, Christianity, religion, what it's done in its history is try to provide an answer for life, right? For suffering. So the thing is, we're operating in the West off of a backdrop, a collective unconscious, you might say, of that worldview. And so how do we make sense of the world? Well, victimhood seems the way to go because suffering is a reality. And so let's, I want to identify as this collective group, or this collective group. So I don't know. So that's the second thing that you said, is the idea that we want to be identified as someone that is unjustly crucified.
so something you just said there, right, was that gives our life meaning? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, I mean, like everything anyone does, ultimately, it's because they they're searching for meaning. They want an answer to this thing called life, right? And life is not pleasant. I mean, you discovered that pretty quickly. And so what's the answer? That goes back to what you said, right? The difference between religious people and quote-unquote secular people is that one of them knows that they're religious and the other just doesn't, right? So and it goes back to this idea of the individual and the collective, about this kind of social search for meaning in the idea of being unjustly crucified. So let's go ahead and open this up. So intersectional politics, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. See, I'm so out of touch with these like popular
Seriously?
words.
Oh yeah, you're reading politics of
I'm
500 BC.
Well, no, I'm reading like the philosophy of politics. Like the principles.
What is a polis?
Exactly. That's literally what I'm reading about.
Yeah.
Like in order to, we must first define politics.
I mean, yeah.
Polis is a Greek word meaning city.
Yes.
Itix is a parasitic bug that sucks blood.
So the city of parasitic bugs who want to be crucified to find meaning in a shitty life.
Yeah.
That's actually pretty accurate.
Yeah, that kind of works. Yeah. So actually, Thomas Sowell said something along the lines of, politics is the art of living together.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is what politics is.
Obviously, America is based on like the idea of the individual, right? And we start.
Let me stop you right there. Where?
What do you mean where?
So
it's predicated on this idea of individual rights, which
Okay,
is an
fair enough.
important thing, right? And is honestly, I would say, like vastly different from any of the other like governments of its time, which is a weird thing to say, right? I think there's a lot more. I don't want to use the word democracy because it's not necessarily a democracy. It's like more of a republic, but is it exactly a republic? Like, who knows? It's an experiment is what it is, right?
Yeah. Well, the idea of rights, right, wasn't first in America, right? It was first in Europe, although it evolved. But you're right, though, in a sense where the very Constitution, the very creed of America, starts with what?
We the people.
Okay, I was thinking about what's the passage about the inalienable rights? Anyway,
Damn. We hold these truths to be self-evident and all men are created equal. It's like imbued by God with inalienable
There you
rights.
go, there you
I
go.
don't think that's right, but
go ahead and read that when you get a chance.
we hold these truths to be self-evident
stop,
that
stop,
all
stop,
men are
stop,
created
stop,
equal.
stop.
They are endowed by their Creator.
Bro.
Dude, I was hella close.
Oh, okay,
I
ready?
was hella close.
Set.
We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That among these, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness.
Awesome, gotcha.
Right? So we have, I don't want to say misinterpreted that. I'm getting ahead of myself, right? So
Go ahead.
there were a couple points I wanted to make on this. The first one is like, what does that look like, right? So ultimately what you see, so you said that there's meaning created in suffering. I think that's like a very Christian idea, and I don't know how you could secularize that. So feel free to try if you want. But I think ultimately it's like purpose of life.
Well, you can't because I don't believe secularity is a thing that even exists.
Too deep, dude. Too
All
deep.
right, keep going.
No. All right, so I would argue that what we see today, right, on both sides of the aisle is ultimately like, hey, just be a good dude, right? So that's what we say in my unspecified branch of the military, and I can see you cringing. I can see you cringing.
Me?
Yes,
Why?
because that's such a lame like way to live your life.
Wait,
Like,
say it again.
dude, just be a
I was
good
laughing
dude.
about prior to what you said. but-
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Just be a good dude.
Okay. I'm cringing.
Ugh, cringe. Right?
Yeah.
So the difference is like, what does that mean? Right?
Yeah.
So ultimately, if you are to live a purposeful life, the idea is like you need to accept responsibility. And that starts with accepting responsibility for yourself. Right? Jordan Peterson says, I need a quick quote. I'm such a Jordan Peterson fanboy.
That's awesome.
And I'm unashamed. Clean your room, right? You got to start there, right? You have to organize your physical life while organizing your, we'll say, metaphysical life, okay? It starts there, and it's ultimately like, if you're going to do what's best for you,
Yeah.
okay, then it's like, what does that mean? Am I going to do what's best for Sam right now?
Mm-hmm.
Or, because I use this joke a lot, I'm always like, oh, that's tomorrow Sam's problem.
Yeah.
Like, glad I'm not that guy. So it's like, or am I going to do what's best for tomorrow Sam? Or is doing what's best for me really doing what's best for my family? Which is really what's doing best for my community, right? So I think it takes a mature understanding of doing what's best for me to understand what is responsibility and to maximize the purpose of your life.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll take that and put it aside.
Mm-hmm.
What does being a good dude mean now, today, in 2021? What it means is I do whatever hedonistic bullshit I want to do as long as I don't hurt anybody else.
That's a good dude.
That's 100% it. That's a good dude.
Yeah. Wow.
So the issue is, right? And that's how we're interpreting everything, and that's ultimately, I would say, the philosophy that we're living, right? This is what individualism in America has turned into.
Yeah.
Because as long as I'm not hurting anybody else, right? I can do yada yada yada. Okay, I can smoke weed while I'm watching porn, while I'm
weed every day.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, I respect your hip hop knowledge.
You're right. So what I'm hearing you say is that basically America was predicated on the individual's rights, right? So freedom, and also, but what comes with rights is not just freedom from being infringed, but duty, right? Which is what you're getting at, which is that because I have a right, it means that I ought to do something with that right, right? A duty, which is responsibility, which will lead to the good of the family, the community, the polis, and etc. So what's happened is that rights has merely come to mean don't infringe upon my freedom, but I have no duties. As long as I don't infringe upon someone else's freedom, I'm duty free.
Exactly. That's literally your duty, is to keep from infringing on
and
other
so
people.
all meaning disappears, because when you don't have a goal, you're purposeless, you're alone, you're anxious,
right?
You're bored.
Mm-hmm. And that amps up all those things, really amp up
what's the
level
solution?
of hedonism.
Hear me out. What's the solution, right? When you're living this individualistic, hedonistic life where all you're doing is obeying the law but not infringing upon other people, what's the solution to such misery? I'm a victim.
That's right.
Yeah.
None of this is my fault. That's nice.
Yeah. So it's the way out. And so what happens when I'm a victim? Guess what? Other people too are victims. I share that same aspect of victimhood. So now I have solidarity. I belong. Something greater than me.
Yeah, it's identity.
Yeah.
It's religious.
They're looking for themselves.
It's religious.
Yeah, they're looking for their identity. We're looking for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to like bracket ourselves off. We do this too.
Yeah, but we
understand.
We do it on purpose.
So, yeah, I agree. But what if I told you that the solution to the problem is that this whole frickin' system is wrong, like philosophically?
You watch your mouth.
I'm not talking about America as a country. I'm talking about our American culture is wrong, the way we perceive the reality of the world. So,
Better tread lightly here, bud.
why?
I love de los Estados Unidos. I'm just kidding. Keep going.
I do too, yeah. And but like, and that's the thing about love, is that if you really love your country, you want what's best for it. And our country is going to shit. So we need a doctor to perform surgery on it, right? Now, I'm not talking about some kind of totalitarian intervention, right?
Oh, I thought you were going to say Dr. Jordan Peterson.
Doctor. He's definitely one of the surgeons working on America right now. I'll put it that way. So what I want to say is this. Ultimately, this paradigm creates intersectional politics, identity politics, right? But the problem is that this entire worldview begins with individualism. So, like you said earlier, if you take this kind of collective mindset and you see what makes this collective, and that collective, ultimately it comes back down to the individual who's part of the collective, right? It's those attributes that you can always keep dividing. It always ends up with the individual. So we have this paradigm where you're either an individualist or you're a collectivist. What if the whole paradigm is wrong? What I want to ask is this. If the individual has dignity, if he has rights, why the hell? What's our reasoning for this?
So those are clearly Christian principles, right? So we are endowed by our Creator with unalienable rights. Is that what you're getting at?
Yes and no, because I agree with you.
There's no secular basis for that, right? So ultimately, if you look at, right, if you take it purely like biological accidental evolution, then it's like, then we're not all created equal. We are clearly not created equal.
Yeah. But my point is this, that you could say, oh, it's because it's from Christianity. Okay, cool. But why? You're telling me where it's from, but you're not telling me why it's right. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm kind of putting you on the spot. And
Yeah, I don't know if I have a good answer to that, right? So
but that's what I'm saying. So maybe we need to get together, which is what we're doing right now, and come up with a good answer for this. Right? I mean, if the American Constitution says that every individual is free, has rights, has dignity, and we don't know why.
After they're born. I'm just kidding.
But that's another consequence, right? But if we don't know why, then we need to get our shit together and figure out why.
Well, I would argue that most people in America like don't. Yeah, I don't think people believe that, right? So, I think if you chase like common beliefs to their end, you see like this whole like idea of, I guess, like nihilism, more or less, right? Where it's like, oh, nothing matters. Like, you know what I'm saying? I mean, and that's really the point you get to. Like, I feel like that's a fair logical conclusion by rejecting like core truths.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And we are kind of seeing this despair on a cultural level. But the way out is social reform, making this world heaven. Because if there's no heaven, then we might as well work on this one. And if you have a collectivist understanding, and then you want to make this world heaven, you get the Gulag Archipelago.
Miss the Mox.
So
wait, so.
But I want to get
just
to the
to
root
rewind
of
a second
this.
ago.
Yeah.
I want to know about. You said we need a paradigm shift between, or away from, collectivism versus individualism.
I absolutely think so, and I think the way you get there is by asking the question, why do individuals have dignity? And that answers the question. So I have an answer, but do you want me to move forward, or do you have anything?
No, dude, I have nothing. That's a good question. Because I'm like, God gave us dignity. Like, it's...
But that's not really an answer. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I know. I totally agree with you.
Yeah, and I also agree with you that that's true, but it's just not good enough, especially in a world that
That's
is
fair,
not
yeah.
Christian. Yeah. So, how to proceed about this, right? So this is what I would say. It goes back to a fundamental thing, right? What do you mean when you say dignity?
I would say dignity is a sense of value, right, for
absolutely.
an individual.
Absolutely, value, right? So think of value. What is value? Is value something independent that's just on its own in this kind of cosmic emptiness? No, it's not. Something that is value is valuable or valued, right? So ultimately, the good is something that is desirable or desired, right? And only something that's desirable is desired. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, all I'm saying is that if we're ascribing dignity to the individual, we're ascribing some kind of intrinsic goodness, right? Value, like you said. So what we're ultimately saying is that the individual in himself or herself is ultimately desirable, valuable. And what is the basis for that? So this is what I believe. The Christian paradigm that brings about this conception of the dignity of the individual rests on the idea that the human being is a person. The very understanding of the word person is crucial here. A person cannot be defined as solitary. Think about it. If you're solitary, then you're not in a relationship. When you talk about
relationships, essential to personhood.
Yeah, when you talk about relationships, you're talking about personal things. It's personal, like love, or shame, intimacy, nakedness.
Intimacy, huh?
Is that how you say it?
No, you just pronounce words weird.
Oh,
Sarah.
intimacy?
Yeah,
Intimacy.
yeah.
In French, it's intimité.
Intimité.
Yeah, intimacy, shame, nakedness, desire. Where have you heard those words before in the Christian story? shame and nakedness.
Oh yeah, okay, Genesis.
So see, we're open. We're philosophically and I would say theologically
Well, it's about to get deep.
opening up this idea of the individual and his value. And you're saying, well, it's Christian, and I'm like, well, yeah, but then I'm like, why? And so we're looking at it like, what is value? Well, it has to do with being desirable, being valued. Okay, so being intimate, personal, interesting. Relationship, intimacy, so that's personal things, nakedness, shame. All these ideas come together, as Jordan Peterson would say, like in a dream, right? And where do you find all these ideas together in a story? A story that we tell ourselves to give ourselves meaning. Genesis 1.
Yep.
And,
Creation.
Genesis 2. And if to be a person is to have dignity, which means that there's an aspect of the person that is interpersonal, that's what it means to be a person.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be a person alone. So ultimately, it means that man is essentially social and that humanity is not possible and is ultimate individualism. You see that? So, but careful, right?
Say that again.
So because personhood is the grounds for dignity,
Yep.
then a human person can never be ultimately individual. He wouldn't be human. He wouldn't be a person.
Well, man was not
He
meant
wouldn't
to be
have-
alone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the meaning of that verse. So what I'm saying here is that ultimately, if you want to maintain the individual, you have to realize that there's no such thing as ultimate individualism. It's the only way. It's not a contradiction, it's a paradox. Because what you see here is that the individual comes out of his intersubjectivity. So this gets into like theology of the body. What does it mean to be man and woman? See, that's why the human person isn't this unisex.
It's a social construct, Dom. We just established this.
Anyway, I'm getting kind of into the weeds, but
No, dude. I feel like I could really get into the weeds on this one, though. Honestly,
Go ahead.
I don't know if this is a whole.
Well,
other,
let's
this
ta-
might be a
let's-
whole nother episode.
yeah. Well, let's tie it
Talking about
together.
Genesis.
So, but I want to bring it back, right? So the idea here is that to hold to the idea that the human individual has dignity, we have to hold to the idea that he is essentially social, right? And so you could take that on this kind of rational, intersubjective, rational level for the human being, but you can also apply this in a certain sense to all of reality. All of reality is in relationship. That's what it means to be in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But here we're talking about a very different kind of relationship, one that is free and knowing, right? Intellect and will. And that is what makes a human a person. And that we ascribe value to because of the deep desire, the freeness and the ability of intimate knowledge that is present there. It's something divine, right? And so we ascribe value to that. And so our whole society is predicated on this assumption, but we've forgotten it. And the individual becomes merely purely individual, which takes away what? His dignity, which creates what? Collectives. It's all connected. So if we recover why the individual is dignified, then we get rid of both the collectivism and the type of individualism that created it.
Is there a secular answer for dignity of an individual, or is it just because you hear a lot of times where like I've had this argument on like Twitter and stuff before, which is probably a bad habit to be honest, but ultimately it's like, where do these things come from if it's not from the Bible? And they're like, well, it's in the law. I was like, okay, so you're telling me 100 years ago that black people weren't actually people? And then it's like when the law changed, then that truth changed? Like, because that's clearly not the case.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what we're seeing is the breakdown of the story. If secularity is a rejection of Christianity in the West, right, then it's inevitable. You're going to get a rejection of the dignity of the person. We're already starting to see it. You're going to get a move towards collectivism. We're already starting to see it. So, I mean, the solution is to recover the stories, to fill back the void that has been created by leaving Christianity behind, but not with something that's going to ultimately destroy us, which is this idea of individualism, the wrong kind, right? As opposed to the individualism that is predicated on that dignity. Right?
Well, maybe it's better this way, that there's no bedrock to build it on, right? So there's no big lie that you can replace dignity of the individual with, right?
Why would that be better?
Because that way it will actually fall apart.
You want things to fall apart?
Yeah.
I kind of do too. Okay, we're kidding.
But they need to, right? So eventually you have to chase that. You have to chase that to like a logical end.
Yeah.
Right. So where's that going to go?
I also want to add that we can push back a little bit in the culture. You don't have to. So I hate doing this,
But we're pushing back in the wrong way because we're not attacking the base that doesn't exist. What we're attacking is like these ideas, and if you approach these ideas with a completely different like metaphysical framework, you're not going to get anywhere. So in my mind, immediately, right, when we're talking about dignity of the individual, I'm thinking about abortion.
Yeah.
And it's like, what is the dignity of an individual who only has one personal connection with one person who doesn't want a connection with them?
See, the dignity of the individual doesn't depend on whether that individual is desired or not. It depends on whether that individual is desirable. That's the distinction here.
That is a good distinction.
The good is desirable, and that's why it's good. It doesn't mean it's being desired here and now, right now. The very reason why to believe that the individual is worthy of respect and has rights is predicated on the idea that he's desirable by other individuals who have the ability to desire and be desired in a free and knowing way. So what I mean is, what is the unit of the polis, since we're talking politics and intersectional politics? What is the unit of the polis? Is it X, the ultimate individual? No, because if it is X, then there's no dignity there. Is it the collective? No, because it's predicated on similarities.
I see
between
how you're tying
X's.
this back. That's pretty clever.
Yeah.
I didn't see that coming at
So
all.
what is
It's the family.
why? Bingo, though. Bingo.
You like looked at me like I was wrong. I was like, how could I be wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. Because so, is there such a thing as a human that's not a son or a daughter?
No. Well, one. No, I'm just kidding.
Ooh. He's not a son?
Not really. He's like his. Well, he's got a mother.
That's literally what I meant. I'm confused.
I mean, the father thing is kind of weird. That was the point I was making. It was more or less a joke.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, he's definitely a son.
Adam and Eve. Did Adam and Eve have belly buttons?
That is a different story. We will talk about that some other episode. But my answer is yes, of course they did. But
All
anyway.
right, so family, core root of the polis.
So yeah, so if you understand that, it actually grounds, so if you understand that the family is the unit of the polis, then it grounds the individual dignity of every human being, and it prevents intersectional politics, as well as this kind of attitude of don't infringe upon others, but you can do whatever you want.
Dude, holy crap. That's
it goes
huge.
against all of that.
Huge. So think about that. Yeah, because all the
It goes
hedonistic
against
things
all of it.
that we're like, more or less preaching against.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they're clearly going to hurt your family when you take those things overboard.
So it's like me saying, well, I'm going to go ahead and, I don't know, stay in my room and binge on video games, and I'm a kid. Or let's say I'm a dad, right? I'm a dad. I'm not hurting anybody. I'm not hurting my kids, right? Well, you are.
Yeah, you are.
It's like this idea that what's in the bedroom stays in the bedroom. I hear that all the time. That's not how that works. The sexual mores of individuals in the country creates a culture. It affects. We're social beings in essence. There's no such thing as I'm doing something that doesn't hurt anybody. Everything you do always affects people, always.
That's what Jordan Peterson said. Like in talking about a value-based life, it's like that's the core of it, right? You need to understand that literally everything you do matters. Because even if you get away with it, like you do something and you get away with it, nobody else knows, nobody else is, immediately affected. It's like you're lying to yourself and you're living out that lie. You're building habit patterns that are going to fail you.
Yeah.
Even if you get away with it the one time.
And so imagine
that's
this.
actually a thing he says. Like I've never met anybody who's ever gotten away with anything.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah. I mean, just imagine this: someone who doesn't infringe on anybody's rights. He's not killing anybody. He's not stealing anything. He's not, having his dog poop on someone else's lawn. He's a perfect citizen in the eyes of the law. But this guy is living a decadent life. Do you think his character is going to be something beautiful to behold? Probably not.
Nah.
Now, bring that person in a community in relationship with others. What's going to happen? Toxicity. He's going to break down relationships. He's going to make parties awful. It's going to affect people. So in a certain sense, it's something that's beyond just mere legal rights. It's a kind of justice that is truly religious. And ironically enough, the word religion was considered to be a subset virtue of the virtue of justice. So this idea that religion is a system of belief that can be privately held, that's never what religion meant. The definition of religion was changed, is what I'm getting at. We can get into that some other time. The point being, though, is that the dignity of the individual is predicated on the family unit, and that dissolves the issues of rampant individualism that ends up creating chaos in society, and the alternative collectivism that tries to impose, this kind of political agenda, but it's also predicated on the rampant individualism that we spoke about. So anyway, the point being is that the family is the solution to all of this. So what do we do from here?
Oh. So, I would argue that we have, you're talking practically? What do we do from here?
Sure.
So I would argue that a lot of our legislation, especially in the forms of social programs, are more or less, well, the more I think about it, the worse it gets. So a lot of our social programs are subsidizing like single mother households, right? Which is like, that sucks, and that's a weird situation, okay? But then you also have things like the culture that is producing single mother households. It's usually not, a widower dying.
It's someone who's respecting the rights of others. See what I did there?
Yeah, exactly.
Someone who's free.
Somebody.
I didn't hit my wife. I left her. I didn't hit her. What about the kids? Well, I didn't hit them. Yeah, but you left them. Well, I'm not infringing on anyone's rights.
Yeah. And then ultimately, right, like, so we're getting to a point where it's like the state is like replacing the family.
Yeah.
Right?
I would put it this way. The global apparatus of the state is replacing the local community.
What do you mean by that?
So you see how there's two different anthropologies here. One is the anthropology of the individual as a person in relationship. The other is an anthropology of an individual as this ultimately autonomous X factor. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's two different views of man, right? So not only does that mean that there's two different views of man, but there's also two different views of the world that unfold from that view of man. So if X, that is not in relationship, but is an agent who's able to move around in the world, and then you have many X's, right? And
they all live in Texas. All right, go ahead. Sorry.
So, and if there's injustice in the world, that means that these X's tend to fight against each other, and there's violence. And the way to impose justice is to take that violence away from them and to give it to one person. And that person says, stop hitting each other, or I will hit you. That's justice. Who determines justice? That ultimate X guy, right? But if we have a different anthropology where the individual's dignity is based on his personhood, then when there's violence, what does that mean? That means that something has been broken in the fabric of what is already peaceful.
Something's disordered, yeah.
Yeah, and something that is originally ordered. So in one view, you have an order that becomes disordered that needs to be restored. Where do you hear that before? Original sin and then redemption. And in the other order, you have a different anthropology and a different cosmology where you have violence first, primordial violence. Where do you hear that? The pagan myths. People are religious. So original violence. And then the androgynous individual. Where do you hear that before? Pagan myths. At first, man he has no gender. Mm-hmm. But the woman comes as a curse. And so, Pandora and everything. So you have this primal androgyny and this primal violence. And the way to bring about peace in this violent world is to give all the violence to one person and to establish a status quo, a kind of what we call a realpolitik, which is there's peace, but it's not real peace. It's like, I won't hit you, you don't hit me. Okay, cool. Is that peace? No.
Not really,
Peace is on the other side where it's I love you, you love me. That's peace. So not only do you have a different anthropology, you have a different cosmology, a different metaphysics, right? And what I want to argue is that the metaphysics and the anthropology of modernism and postmodernism, right, of the modern world, is the pagan anthropology and cosmology that has come back. So what you have is Christianity introduced a different anthropology and a different metaphysics that created a better world. And that it's kind of like it went like this and then like this. So for those who can't see, Christianity rose out of paganism and brought about all the good things that you and me, Sam, love, but then is declining. And guess what comes back? Paganism again. It's just that this time we call it science. We call it, and I mean science in a pejorative way here. I mean science in the sense where the reductionistic empiricism, right? Mm-hmm. Where, and so the spokesman of science, we talked about this, wearing their white suits, their white lab suits, making verdicts on what is real and what is not real, right? Where do we see that before? They have a certain kind of authority that the people look up to. And the state, legislating what is right and wrong and contracts and establishing the real politique that everybody chill, don't slap those people. You stop slapping that person or I'll slap you. So what you have is a return to primal androgyny and primal chaos. Now, where do we see a return to primal androgyny in our society?
So for the listeners, because clearly I know what you're talking about. Define androgyny.
Androgyny is this idea of a genderless, autonomous being. Yeah.
So that ties back right into where we started in the beginning of this, right? So all identity, right, including gender, is a social construct.
Bingo. It's
literally it's a manifestation of nature. I'm sorry, nurture. I got it mixed up. So the whole transgender push, right?
Yeah.
Even LGBT,
mm-hmm.
Q, I,
O, P,
L, and that that also ties into what we were talking about, right? With the fact that acronym keeps growing, right? And you see that because of the means at which we're trying to continue to create more sections in the intersectional game. Yeah. You're trying to boil down to what's going to be
the individual.
Literally one person. Yeah.
The X factor.
Yeah.
I want to bring back to make it full circle. You talked about the difference between religious people and secular people is that the religious people know they're religious. Well, I mean, we kind of see after this conversation, we kind of see how that's really true, right? And so the secular people are religious in a different way. They have their own myths. It's just not in a book anywhere. I mean, it is. It's like here and there.
They're absolutely just as zealous about it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, just as dogmatic.
Oh, yes. Right? So we have this new story of primal violence, primal androgyny, right? This new myth, right? Which is a religion. So it goes back to what you were saying. So what's this? Well, I was asking you, like, what's the solution? And you're like, practically? And I'm like, yeah, sure. So in a certain sense, like, what is the solution ultimately? Well, look at the difference. So you have paganism, and then Christianity brings a completely different myth, and then you have the modern world with a pagan myth. So you have religion everywhere. It's like what you said. The difference is that some people know it.
Yeah.
Religion is everywhere. What's the difference between the religion of the secular world and the religion of the Christian world? What's the difference, ultimately?
Jesus.
I mean, yes, absolutely. But I guess I'm being a little more esoteric. Which one are you? Are you a pagan or are you a Christian?
Christian.
Okay, why are you a Christian?
Because I believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. I believe in the historical evidence for resurrection.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I would argue what I boil it down to. So.
Yeah. So you believe it's. I
don't know what word you're trying to get me to say.
I know. I
believe it is truth.
Bingo.
I see what you're saying.
I'm trying to lead you somewhere.
Well, now, to be fair, that was a pretty. I see what you're saying.
Okay.
Yeah. The idea is we believe in.
Okay.
Yeah. Because now that you got me to say that, I absolutely understand
where I was leading
where you were leading me and why that makes sense.
Okay. If both sides believe that it is true, you have one side saying, claiming this is true, the other side claiming this is true. Is it possible for both sides to be true?
Negative.
No. Okay. So the difference between this religion and that religion ultimately is that one is true and the other is false. So I guess what I'm getting at is that what's the difference between the paganism before Christianity, as well as the religious secularism and Christianity? The answer I was looking for, and I did a really bad
One
job
is
at
true.
true religion.
True religion, like the genes.
So we need to recover true religion.
Like the genes.
I don't know what that is.
I know.
Obviously, it's a kind of genes.
Another hip hop reference.
Oh, okay. Anyway, what I'm getting at, Sam, is that what's wrong with society? We've lost true religion. How do you fix it? We have to recover true religion. That's the
Why do they call it true
ultimate
religion?
answer.
Is there something more nuanced than it literally being a religion that's true?
So the reason why I say true religion and not a religion that is true is because those two sentences define religion differently. Think about it this way. If I say a religion is true, then I'm predicating truth to object A, right?
Yeah.
So it's a decision on the validity of object A. But when you say true religion, what I mean by that is that religion is not an object upon which we decide. It's an action. Religion is not a belief system. It involves that. That's part of it. But at its essence, religion is a virtue. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Define religion as a virtue the way you did before. Because you said it's basically you said it was a derivative of relationship.
Of justice.
Justice.
Right.
Justicia.
So, if the good is objective,
If the good is objective. Okay.
and if the individual has goodness because of his subjectivity, his personhood, then if I'm in a relationship with you, there's a sense in which I have a duty to love you. I mean, I'm trying to. It's hard.
Yeah. That's probably my bad.
I'm just kidding. So I have a kind of moral obligation, right? When you talk about morality, you're talking about right and wrong, good and evil, right? And so if I have an obligation towards you, it's an obligation predicated on the good, right? And so if I took something from you that was yours and not mine and that you didn't intend to give me, I did something evil. I didn't render to you what was owed to you. I took it from you.
Okay. Yep.
So it's a violation of justice.
I see that.
So we owe to each other goodness. We owe to each other, right, what is our due. And so the morality of interpersonal relationships is predicated on goodness, right? And so justice is merely acting within the good, rendering to others what is their due. It's love, it's relationship, it's harmony, it's peace. That's what justice is. But it's all predicated on the fact that we are created in the image of God, of the good. You see what I'm saying? The good itself, upon which our relationships are predicated, is the very foundation of this very idea of justice.
Oh, bro, holy crap. Say that again. That was, boy, that was good right there.
What I'm saying is that the very thing that makes something just, right, that makes what I owe to you and what you owe to me good and not evil, and therefore just, all of that is predicated on goodness itself, the pure goodness itself. And that goodness, in classical theism, we call God. And so when I render justice to you, I'm rendering justice to goodness, to God. Religion is a type of justice. It's rendering to God, the ultimate source of all goodness, what is his due, which is everything.
Worship. Yeah.
Worship. It's our relationship. It's the community's relationship, right? It's the polis's relationship in respect to God, to goodness.
That's a good definition of religion.
That is religion. Now, guess what? The word religion, religio, it's Latin. Guess what it means?
Religion. Relationship.
Yeah, it means.
Does it really? That was a total guess.
It means,
makes sense, though.
It means to connect. Religio. It's a connection to God. It's what ties us to him and to us. So religion is not just kind of like, I believe that, I don't know, that this is the best way of understanding tulips. And then someone else comes up and says, I think this is a better way of understanding tulips. I'm like, well, you're wrong and I'm right. I have the right idea of tulips.
I have true religion.
Yeah, well, I have a religion that is true.
Yeah.
You see that? So like, I have the right way of understanding tulips. No, you have the right way of understanding tulips. See, that's not religion, right? So there is a kind of creedal aspect. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Creedal,
absolutely.
yeah. And so that's not going to be completely absent, but it's not merely this belief system. It's literally a way of acting. It's political in every sense of the word, right? And so I'm saying that the politics of the modern world is religious, but it's not God that they're worshiping, right? And so it's some other God. The idea here is that instead of worshiping God, what do? We worship ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Where have we heard that story before? That was rhetorical, the Bible.
I was trying to think. I was like, wow, literally in my mind, I was like, so immediately I was like, golden calf. And I was like, well, but kind of actually. And then I was like, yeah, literally every story.
Yeah, and Lucifer too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the apocryphal
And so
story.
that's the issue is like, I want to be like God. That's the tree of good and evil. Or like,
But what does Adam and Eve say when they decide to eat from the fruit? What does the serpent say to them?
doesn't he say it is good?
I don't think so.
I
Let's
don't
cut
remember.
that out.
I don't remember what he says.
I'm trying to. Oh, got you.
Wait, you'll be
Yeah.
like God. Is that what you're? Oh, okay.
Say it again.
That's what I just said.
No, you can talk about the golden calf.
No. Before that, I was like, you talk about. I said that is the tree of good and evil. It was like they wanted to be like God.
Yeah, you did say that.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Say it again, though.
They wanted to be like God.
Yeah. So
So yeah, that's ultimately it.
it's
They
the biblical
wanted
story.
They wanted to be like God, right?
Yeah.
And so that's ultimately. Or there's a lot that goes into that, and I feel like I could talk about that. For
I want to
days.
add something real quick, though. But go ahead.
What do you got?
I want to tell you something really interesting. Is that if the androgynous individual is self-sufficient in an autonomous way, and he becomes the god of this kind of primordial chaos, guess what? When the Hebrew scriptures talk about the creation of man, what do? God created them male and female. They separate the androgyny, and both are good. And guess what? The ultimate individualism becomes interpersonal relationship. What does that mean about man? He's not God. The division of man into male and female takes away the tendency to worship man. So the division of the animals, as well as the moon and the sun, the Hittites, hello, right? The animals, the Egyptians, hello.
Yeah.
You know, the light from the darkness. Where did I hear that? Oh, wait. Babylon. The god of light, Marduk. Oh, my God. See, so all these divisions, they're a polemic against idolatry. But what's really cool is that division means that we're not divine, but it also makes us
Look at all those
into
root words there. I'm just kidding.
what?
Divinity, divide.
Oh, man.
Look, I'm not the Latin guy. I don't know. You're not that guy, pal. You're not that guy.
But the point being here is this, that the division shows that man is not God, but it also says in the text that he's made in the image of God, who we get to find out God is a triune communion of persons.
He
And
is
so-
a relationship.
He is love, literally. That's the cool thing about Christianity is when we say it, we mean it literally, right?
Yeah.
And so man, although he's not God, is made in his image because he is made as if it were into two incarnations of the same being, male and female, which shows that they're made for each other. So the idea of person becomes physical, and you see it in the very body of the other.
Ooh, what does that sound like?
Theology of the body.
Or, oh, is that where you get that from?
Well,
in my mind,
yeah.
it's like when God becomes physical to display his, relationship
Yeah,
with humanity.
yeah, which is
He
the
becomes
church.
humanity,
And the church is described as what? A woman.
the bride of Christ.
Yeah. And what Paul says in Ephesians, this is a great mystery. He says that the married couple, it's an analogy for the love between Christ and his bride, the church. And so as Paul talks about that love, taking flesh, and the husband, he even says the husband feeds the wife. And so how does Christ love his bride? He feeds her. They become one flesh, the Eucharist.
You lost me there.
Yeah, I know I did. Anyway, so no. So all I'm saying is that the cool thing is, though, at the end it ends up in the same place, which is man is divinized through Christ, and so he gets what he ultimately wanted at the sin, where he tried to take the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Ultimately, he receives it from the tree of life and does become God, because Jesus became man, so we could become God. Anyway. There's a lot of symmetry there, and parallels and paradoxes. Anyway, it's beautiful.
It is beautiful. It's also like mysterious, you know.
Yeah.
I get like the tingles when I think about it too much.
Yeah.
It's like I uncovered some kind of divine secret. Oh. Like Tom Hanks is going to come in here with his long hair, and
Paul says this mystery was revealed once and for all to his saints. It was hidden from the ages, he says, but it was now revealed in Jesus Christ. Anyway, so much there. It's like the difference between the modern world and the classical world is that the classical world, right, they want to understand being, they want to understand God. So what do? They stick their head in the heavens, in the clouds, and they kind of look around like, oh my God, this is huge. But the modern man tries to take the heavens, put it in his head, and his head splits.